She set a blank check in front of me at the memorial dinner and uncapped her own pen. The way some people hand you a hymnal when they've decided you've forgotten the words. Sign it. In his name, Delia. 24 years. It is time you paid your brother back. For 24 years, I had been the reason my brother died, the errand that sent him out, onto the ice, the little sister he could never say no to, the child who should have stayed home that night. Here is what my mother did not know. In my coat pocket, folded inside a paper napkin, was a small cassette tape with her own voice on it, from the night he died, and in my bag was a bank file with my name signed on it 11 times, in her handwriting. On documents I had never seen, I read forged signatures for a living. Now, I can tell you, in about 90 seconds, whether the person who signed a paper is the person whose name is on it. It took me 34 years to look at my own. Last month, I finally read the ones she faked as me, and I made every stolen year cost her, to the dollar, without ever raising my voice. My name is Delia Marsh. I am 36 years old. And if you have ever been handed the blame for something you weren't even in the room for, if your family made you carry a coffin you never packed, stay with me, because the most honest thing in that dining room was about to be a tape recorder the size of a bar of soap. If that was you, tell me your city and the word room in the comments. I read everyone. The real story starts long before that check. I restore sound for a living. My official title is Questioned Document Examiner. But the plainer version is this: when an insurance company thinks a signature on a claim was forged, or a will was altered, they send it to a lab, and I decide whether the hand that made the mark is the hand it claims to be. A signature is the one drawing of yourself you make 10,000 times without thinking. That is exactly why it can't lie. Nobody can copy the parts they don't know they're doing. I learned that skill in a laboratory in Portland, Maine. I learned the original lesson at home, in a small town 90 minutes up the coast, in a house with a porch light that never turned off. Before I tell you what played on that tape, you have to understand what was taken from me. Not on the night my brother died, in every one of the 24 years that came after it. Let me take you back to the night everything in my family got its shape. The night my brother died. I was not home. Hold on to that. It becomes the whole case. Later, I was 11. I turned 12 2 weeks after, asleep on a fold-out couch at a friend's house across town, 3 streets from the water, under a comforter that smelled like someone else's fabric softener. My brother's name was Theo. He was 19. 19. He was the kind of older brother who taught his kid sister 3 guitar chords, and then acted like she'd invented music. He was home that February night because his college was on winter break. Our mother was not home either. She was at a church committee dinner at the Elks Lodge, the one with the long tables and the metal coffee urns, and it had been sleeting since 4 p.m. At 11:40 p.m., a state trooper knocked on the door of my friend's house. Her mother woke me. I remember the hallway light and the cold coming off the storm door, and a man in a gray hat who would not look at me directly. Theo had gone off Route 1 near the Duck Trap Bridge. The road there curves and drops toward the river, and that night, it was a sheet of black ice. He was alone in the car. There was no one else involved. He was gone before the ambulance turned onto the highway. I was 12. I did not cry at the house. I did not cry at the funeral. I have cried exactly once in the years since, alone. And I will tell you when. Because I promised myself I would be honest about that part. Here is the sentence that built the next 24 years of my life. It arrived 9 days after the funeral, in our kitchen. While my mother rinsed a casserole dish a neighbor had brought, she did not turn around. She said, very softly, almost kindly, "He went out for you." You know, I was 12. I said, "I didn't understand." She said, "He was on his way to get you. You are the reason. He was on that road." I had not asked Theo to get me. I was asleep at my friend's house. My friend's mother was going to drive me home in the morning. None of that mattered. My mother had already chosen the story, and once a story like that is chosen, the facts just have to move over and make room. That was the first time she said it. It was not the last, and she was very, very good at saying it. Stay with me. This is where a grieving mother turns into something you can measure. 2 months after the funeral, my mother started leaving the porch light on. Every night. All night. She'd walk out at dusk, reach up, twist the switch, and leave it burning until morning. When neighbors asked, she'd touch her collarbone and say, in a voice pitched exactly for company, "So he can find his way home. The dead do not walk home." And my mother was not a stupid woman. But the town loved it. It became a thing people said about her. At the grocery store and the bank, that poor Colette still leaves the light on for her boy. The light was never really about Theo. I understood that eventually, but it took me most of my life. For now, just remember the light. It comes back. A year after Theo died, my mother turned her grief into an institution. She founded the Theo Marsh Memorial Scholarship at the regional high school, $500 a year to a graduating senior who embodied Theo's spirit. There was a dinner. There were white flowers and a printed program with his face on the cover. The good photograph. Theo at 17 in his hockey jersey, squinting into the sun. There was a speech. My mother gave it every year, and every year it got better. The way a story you've told 100 times gets better. Smoother, harder to argue with, and every year, there was a part for me. I was made to stand up in front of a room of 80 people and read a poem. Not a poem I wrote. A poem Theo had liked, 4 stanzas about a boat leaving a harbor. And my mother had it printed on a stiff card with a black border, laminated so it would survive. From the year I was 13 to the year I was 30, I stood in that banquet hall and read the same 4 stanzas in the same order. Now Delia will read the poem her brother loved, my mother would say. The sister who was closest to him, the one he'd have done anything for, the one he'd have done anything for. She said that every year, she said it the way you'd read a verdict. Everyone in the room heard the same thing. I did. He went out for you. Grief in our house had a control panel, and only one person was allowed to touch it. The card was laminated because the day I touched it, everything caught fire. I want to give you one small scene, because it is the one that taught me what the light really was. The winter I was 16. There was an ice storm that took the power out for 3 days. The whole town went dark. Candles in every window. Generators up and down the road. And my mother stood at the front door in her coat at 10 p.m., trying the porch switch over and over. Upset in a way I had never seen her upset about anything real. Not The cold. Not the food. Going bad in the freezer. The light. She could not stand that the light was off. She made my stepfather drive an hour to a hardware store the next morning and buy a small gasoline generator. And she wired it to one thing and one thing only, the porch light. For 3 days, while we ate cold food by candlelight, that one bulb burned over an empty step, for a boy who was never walking up it. I was 16, and I remember thinking very clearly, she isn't keeping it on for Theo. She is keeping it on. So people driving past will see that she kept it on. I didn't have the words for it yet. I have them now. It was a stage light, and she could not perform in the dark. Remember the generator. Remember that she'd run an engine for 3 days to keep one bulb lit. It tells you exactly what she was willing to spend, and on what. Let me show you how careful this woman was. The villain in this story never once raised her voice. She never screamed. She never hit me. If you'd had dinner at our table, you'd have gone home and told your husband what a graceful, wounded, devoted Mother Colette Marsh was, and you'd have meant it. Her cruelty was quiet, patient, and backed by paperwork. A program, a scholarship, a printed poem, a porch light. She built a monument, and she wrote me into it as the flaw in the marble. That is the kind of villain that actually exists. Not a monster. A system. And a system is much harder to walk away from, because walking away looks, from the outside, like the cruel thing to do. When I was 18, I found out about the money. Or I thought I found out. What I actually found out was a lie shaped like an answer. I'd gotten into a state university, 2 hours inland. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the financial aid forms when I asked my mother about Grandma Ruth's college money. My grandmother, my father's mother, had told me more than once that there was money set aside for my education. Ruth was a retired school teacher who had buried a husband and a grandson and did not say things she didn't mean. There is a fund for you, Delia. She'd tell me, for after, so I asked. My mother did not look up from the sink. That is gone, sweetheart. She said, you have no idea what this family has spent. Because of that night, the funeral, my therapy, your brother's headstone. What Ruth left barely touched it. Because of that night. Meaning, because of me. She said it so gently. It took me years to feel the knife go in. I signed my student loan papers at 18 at a branch of Casco Bay Savings. On a Tuesday, with a blue pen a teller handed me. I remember it because the teller complimented my signature. She said I had a confident A. I've thought about that teller 1,000 times since, because that day, in that same bank, was the only genuine signature of mine anyone would file for a very long time. Remember? The confident A. It is the whole case. I took $38,000 in loans over 4 years. I paid every dollar of it back myself, waiting tables and cataloging audio at a public radio archive, which is where I first learned that a human voice can survive on a strip of tape, long after the person is gone. I did not know yet how much that would matter. Now, the second thing. My grandmother told me, this one I sat on for years. Because it made no sense. Ruth got sick the winter. I was 30, congestive heart failure. I drove up to see her at the nursing home on a Sunday. When I knew my mother would be at church, Ruth was small in the bed, and clear-eyed in a way she hadn't been in weeks. She gripped my wrist with a strength that surprised me. "Delia," she said, "your name is on paper. It has no business being on." I asked her what she meant. "Ask the bank," she said. "Not your mother, the bank." Then a nurse came in with a tray, and the window closed, and Ruth drifted, and I told myself she was confused. She died 4 months later. In the fall, I was 30. I did not go to the reading of anything, because by then, I had already left. Let me tell you about leaving, because this is the night the ladder I'd been climbing finally reached the top. I want to be careful with the word left, because I didn't storm out. I walked. I was 30. It was the annual scholarship dinner, the 22nd one. I'd been quietly saving for 2 years. 3 small accounts I'd consolidated into one number. Money, I told myself, was for a life I hadn't started yet. My mother knew. The number. She always knew. The number. She'd asked me to give back to Theo's legacy. And by give back, she meant hand it over. And she'd chosen to ask me in front of the room, because the room was the point. She stood at the head of the long table, with a printed pledge card in her hand. "Delia has been blessed," she told the guests. "And it is time she remembered where she comes from. Theo went out for her. The least she can do is carry his name forward. He went out for her." There it was again, in front of 80 people. I sat there, and I did something I'd started doing in a small gray office on Wickenden Street, in a therapist's chair. Once a week for a year. I counted, because a few months earlier, my therapist had asked me a question that took the floor out from under me. She asked, "How many times has your mother told you, to your face, that your brother died because of you?" I started writing them on a legal pad. I dated each one. The kitchen, 9 days after the funeral, when I was 12. A scholarship dinner when I was 15. When I said I didn't want to read the poem anymore. The morning of my high school graduation. When she said Theo should have been the one walking. The Christmas I was 22 and didn't drive home because of a snowstorm. She said the storm should have reminded me there were 7. 7 times, spread across 18 years. Each one placed with the precision of a woman setting a table. My therapist looked at the page a long time. Then she said the sentence I have kept in my chest ever since. "Delia, you are not grieving your brother. You are surviving the story your mother built on top of him." So there I was at 30, at the dinner, with the pledge card sliding toward me, and I counted. And it landed on 8. I stood up. My hands were steady. My voice was level. "That is 8, Mom." She asked what I meant. I didn't explain. I set my napkin on my plate. I did not read the poem. I walked around the table, past the printed program with my brother's face on it, and out the front door under the porch light that was on. Even though it was only 7 p.m., because by then the light was always on, I drove 90 minutes home, in the dark. I did not go back for 5 years. If you were me, if your family had built a public shrine and carved you into it as the villain, would you have walked out? Or would you have stayed and read the poem one more time to keep the peace? Tell me. Below, one word. Stay or go. For 5 years, my mother stayed exactly the same, and the ground under her quietly shifted. She kept the scholarship. She kept the porch light. She kept telling people in the low, brave voice she used for tragedy that her daughter had gone strange, that grief had taken Delia somewhere none of us can reach. The town version was that I'd had a breakdown. The truth was less dramatic. I'd simply stopped answering the phone. I rebuilt in the plainest way there is. I finished paying the loans. I got certified. I got good at the lab, then better than good. The person they brought in on the cases that were going to court, I bought a used car outright and felt like a millionaire. And I met June. There was a case around then that I've thought about every day since. A woman came to us because her late father's second wife had signed his name to a deed transferring the family house to herself. 3 days before he died in a hospital bed, when everyone knew he couldn't have held a pen. I proved it in an afternoon. The forger had a habit real signers don't have. She lifted her pen in the middle of the last name to check her work, and left a tiny gap you can see under magnification. A place where the ink stops and starts again. The dead man's real hand never once lifted in that spot. In 40 years of signing, I remember writing that up and thinking, coldly, professionally, how strange it was that I could see a stranger's whole betrayal in one broken letter, and had never once thought to look at my own name. A signature is the drawing of yourself. You trust the least to notice, and the most to survive you. I was surrounded by the proof all day, every day, and I still hadn't looked. That comes back to stay with me. June is a hospice nurse. She spends her days with people in the last rooms of their lives, and she is the calmest person I have ever met, because she has learned the difference between a thing you can fix and a thing you can only sit beside. I told her the whole story on our 4th date, in a diner. All of it. The light and the poem and the 7 times. Braced for her to tell me how to feel about my mother. She didn't. She stirred her coffee and let the silence do what silence does. Then she said the thing I will remember for the rest of my life. You can leave a light on for someone, June said, without standing in it your whole life. I didn't cry, but I put my fork down. Because I understood, for the first time, that the porch light had a second bulb, and the second bulb was pointed at me. Now, here is where the story stops being about a dead boy and starts being about a signature. Stay with me. This part, I built 1 page at a time. My grandmother, Ruth, died in the fall. I was 30, but her house didn't get sold until last year because of some snag with the estate. And last winter, 5 years after I walked out, my aunt on my father's side, the one relative in that family who'd been quietly on my side since before I was born, mailed me a box. It was a coffee tin, an old red one, the kind that used to hold a pound of ground coffee, with a plastic lid that had gone brittle at the rim. There was a note taped to the top, in Ruth's looping teacher's handwriting. Delia's. For when she is ready. Ask the bank. Ask the bank. The same 3 words from the nursing home. Inside the tin were 2 things. A microcassette, the little tape from an answering machine, no bigger than a matchbook, and a savings passbook, the paper kind, from Casco Bay Savings. In the name of a trust I had never heard of, the Adelia Marsh Education Trust. Adelia is my full name. Nobody has called me that since a teacher took attendance in the 4th grade. The passbook showed a starting balance from the year after Theo died, $40,000. My grandmother had put $40,000 in a trust for my education. The year I turned 13, the passbook also showed it draining away, withdrawal after withdrawal, small enough to look like housekeeping, spread across 8 years. By the time I was 21, it held $91. I sat on my kitchen floor and did the arithmetic, so you don't have to. $40,000, gone in 11 withdrawals. Over 8 years. That is not a college fund that barely touched a funeral. That is 4 years of tuition. That is the exact $38,000 in loans I spent a decade paying back, waiting tables. While the money that was supposed to spare me sat in an account with my name on it and drained into somebody else's plans. I did not cry then either. I got very still, which is a different thing, and worse, because I knew what a trust like that requires. A trust has a trustee, the adult who controls it, and a beneficiary, the person it is for. I was the beneficiary. And a withdrawal from a trust like that requires the beneficiary's signature once she comes of age. 11. Withdrawals. 11. Signatures. I had signed nothing. I had never seen this account, which meant that somewhere in a bank's records were 11 documents with my name, written by a hand that was not mine. I do this for a living. I know exactly how to find out. I want to be very clear about how I did the next part, because it is the whole reason it worked. I did not break a single rule. I did not use my job to snoop. I never touched the case at my own lab. What I did was the most boring, powerful thing in the world. I exercised my rights as the beneficiary and I asked, in writing, for the full accounting. A full accounting is exactly what it sounds like. Every deposit, every withdrawal, and copies of every document that authorized them. I was legally entitled to it. It took the bank 6 weeks, and a certified letter, but they sent it. A folder came in the mail. An inch thick. I have handled thousands of folders like it. My hands were not steady this time. I laid the pages out on my dining table under a lamp, the way I do at work. 11. Withdrawal authorizations. 11 times. Adelia Marsh, written in blue ink, on the signature line. And there, in the same file, 1 page further, was the exemplar. That is our word for a known, genuine signature. The real one you measure the fakes against. The bank had kept the signature card from the day I opened my very first account, at 18, with a teller who complimented my confident A. My real signature, and the 11 forged ones, were finally in the same folder, and they did not match. I am not going to give you the whole examiner's report, because at the moment it lands, the last thing you need is a vocabulary lesson. Here is what mattered. When a person forges a name, they draw it. They lift the pen where a real signer wouldn't. They slow down on the hard letters. They press too hard, trying to be careful. My real A starts low and rises in one confident stroke. All 11 fakes started high and came down, careful and shaky, drawn by a right-handed person copying from a model. There was a tremor in every one of them, the tiny wobble a hand makes when it is drawing instead of writing, when it is watching itself instead of just going. Real signatures have speed, forgeries have caution, and caution leaves a fingerprint, and the pen lifted, every single time, in the exact same wrong place, the way a copyist lifts to glance back at what she is copying. I am left-handed. My mother is not. My name, in her hand, leaned the wrong way against the light, like a word spelled correctly by someone who has never heard it out loud. She had signed my name 11 times. She had spent my grandmother's $40,000, and a good chunk of it, I would learn exactly how much soon, had gone into a scholarship with my dead brother's name on it. A monument I'd been forced to stand up and honor every single year of my childhood. She stole from the living daughter to build a statue to the dead son. And then she billed the living daughter for the funeral. If you were you, sitting at that table with an inch-thick folder and a tape you hadn't yet been brave enough to play, would you walk into her next dinner? One word. Yes or no. I read every single one. I had the paper. I still hadn't played the tape. For 2 weeks, the microcassette sat in a drawer because I was afraid of it in a way I couldn't explain. I finally borrowed a machine that could play the old format. This is genuinely what I do. I keep obsolete players for exactly this. And one night, June sat on the floor with me, and I pressed the worn plastic button down. There was a soft rush of static first. Then a recorded voice announced the date. The way old answering machines did. It was the 17th of February, the night Theo died. Then my mother's voice. Younger, impatient, recorded off the family answering machine because Theo hadn't picked up. Theo, it is Mom. I know it is sleeting. I don't care. Come, get me from the lodge. I've had 2 glasses of wine, and I am not driving in this. Now, please, right now. I stopped the tape. June didn't say anything. She put her hand flat on my back and left it there. There it was. The whole lie. In one message. In her own voice. Theo did not go out for me. I was asleep, 3 streets from the water, at a friend's house. Theo went out into a February ice storm because his mother had 2 glasses of wine at a church dinner and did not want to risk her own car. And she sent her 19-year-old son instead. And then she buried the truth under a porch light and a poem and a scholarship and told a 12-year-old girl it was her fault. And she told her again, 8 times, over 18 years. I let the tape run to the end. And after her message, there was one more. It was Theo. From earlier, that same week. A message he'd left on the machine for me that I'd never gotten. Because my mother screened the machine. Hey, Dee. It is your favorite brother. Don't tell Mom. But I got you something for your birthday. And it is gonna blow your mind. 2 more weeks. More. Practice your chords. Kid, you are gonna need 'em. Practice your chords. I was 2 weeks from turning 12. He died before he could give me whatever it was, and I would not find out what it was for another 24 years. I made a copy of the tape that night. 3 copies, because you never keep evidence in one place. I named the file on my computer the plainest thing I could, Lodge, because that is where she was, warm and dry, when she sent him out. Then I found out about the dinner. My half-sister called me. She is 22 now. My mother remarried, and Nora is the daughter from that marriage, which makes her Theo's sister who never met him, and my sister who grew up hearing I was the family's private disaster. Nora and I had exchanged maybe 10 sentences in her whole life. So when her name came up on my phone one evening in April, I knew something was wrong. I am not supposed to be calling you, Nora said. Her voice was young and scared, and I could hear a car engine idling. Like she'd driven somewhere to make the call where nobody could hear. Mom's planning something for the memorial dinner. She is written pages. She has been reading them out loud in the kitchen, and there is a check with your name on the memo line already filled in. I asked Nora why she was telling me. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Because I looked you up, and you don't look like a person who had a breakdown. You look like a person who left, and I want to know which one it was. I told her to come to the dinner and watch, and to bring nothing. I would bring everything. The invitations went out on heavy cream cards. Theo Marsh Memorial Dinner, 24th Annual, followed by a line. I had to read twice. A family reconciliation. My mother had turned her son's death, my stolen money, and my public humiliation into a themed evening. And she'd invited a room full of witnesses. The way you'd invite a jury. The guest list was chosen the way she chose everything. The high school principal, because the scholarship ran through his office. The pastor from the church who'd been fed a soft, distorted version of me for 2 decades, and had no idea he'd been handed a weapon. 2 neighbors who'd been leaving casseroles and telling the porch light story for 24 years. My stepfather, quiet as ever, Nora, and me. I want you to understand what I walked in carrying, because this is where restraint stops being weakness and becomes the sharpest tool in the room. I had the folder. I had the tape. And I had already, 3 weeks earlier, done the thing that mattered most. I had filed a formal report of forgery with Casco Bay Savings, through the proper channel, with a neutral examiner, not me, confirming the signatures so that no one could ever say I'd rigged my own family's case. The bank had already opened an investigation. The scholarship's finances were already being reviewed by the school. The verdict was already moving through the system before I ever sat down at that table. The dinner wasn't where I'd win. The dinner was just where the truth got said out loud, in the room where the lie was born. We drove up on a Saturday in May. June drove. I watched the coast come in through the passenger window. The water first a flat line, and then a wide field of glare. The same drive I'd taken 100 times with my stomach tightening. And for the first time in my life, it didn't tighten. The folder was in my bag. The tape was in my coat. The porch light was on when we pulled in. Of course, it was. My mother met us at the door in a soft gray cardigan, looking smaller and gentler than the woman in my memory, which is a trick that time plays, and I did not fall for it. She hugged me first. She held June's hand a beat too long and said, "Theo would have liked you. He liked kind faces." She said my brother's name inside the first 30 seconds. Like laying down a card she'd been holding for 5 years. There were 11 of us at the table. My mother had set a 12th place, empty, with a folded card that read Theo and a single white flower in a narrow glass. Bone, china, time, the good set. A printed program at every seat with my brother's 17-year-old face on the cover. We sat down at 7 p.m. between the salad and the main course. My mother stood. She did not have the pages in her hand yet. They were folded beside her plate, and I could see the blue numbering in the margins. The way she'd numbered every accusation. Because a woman who numbers her grief is telling you she rehearsed it. She looked at me, then at June, then back at me. The room quieted around her, the way it had been trained to for 24 years. "June," she said, "before we go any further, you should know what kind of family you've joined." She turned to me, and her voice went tender, and tender was always when it hurt the most. "Delia, your brother went out into an ice storm to come get you, and he never came home for 24 years. This family has asked one thing of you, that you honor him. Tonight, in front of the people who love us, I am asking you to come home, sign the pledge, read the poem, Be his sister. Again. She sat down. She unfolded the pages. She slid the laminated poem card across the table toward me. Its black border, soft at the corners from being held so many times, and she began to read. She read for 6 minutes, without raising her voice once. 6 numbered reasons I had failed my brother, my mother, and my dead grandmother. She had beautiful handwriting and a terrible aim, and she pointed it at a woman who wasn't there anymore. I let her finish. Every word that matters to me. I did not interrupt her once. When she set the pages down, the room turned to me, waiting for me to apologize or to cry. The pastor had his hands folded. A neighbor had already lifted her napkin to her eye. Nora was watching me with her whole body. Still, I did not pick up the poem card. I reached into my bag and I took out the small player, the obsolete one I keep for work, with the microcassette already loaded. I set it in the center of the table, next to the white flower, in front of Theo's empty chair. Before I answer you, Mom, I said, I want everyone here to hear something I found in Grandma Ruth's things. It was recorded in this family. On our answering machine, the night Theo died. I was 12. I haven't touched it since. Because I didn't know it existed, I pressed the button down. The soft rush of static, the recorded date, the 17th of February. Then my mother's voice, 24 years younger, filled the dining room. Theo. It is Mom. I know it is sleeting. I don't care. Come. Get me from the lodge. I've had 2 glasses of wine, and I am not driving in this. Now, please. Right now. The pastor turned his head very slowly and looked directly at my mother. The neighbor lowered her napkin and did not raise it again. My stepfather set down his fork. Nora put her hand over her mouth. My mother did not move. Her wine glass sat untouched, sweating a ring onto the good tablecloth. I let the silence hold. Then I said one sentence. Quietly into it. I was asleep at a friend's house, 3 streets from the water. He didn't go out for me. I looked at my mother. He went out for you. She opened her mouth. She closed it. And then she did the thing she had always done. The pivot. The reach for a softer knife. Delia, she said. And her voice cracked on cue, on the last syllable. I've carried this for 24 years. Do you have any idea what it costs a mother? I know exactly what it cost. I said, I have the receipt. And I put the folder on the table. I did not raise my voice. I want you to picture this, because the whole genre gets it wrong. There was no screaming. I informed. I laid it out in numbered statements, the way she'd numbered hers, except mine could be checked. 1. In the year after Theo died, Grandma Ruth put $40,000 into a trust for my education. It is called the Adelia Marsh Education Trust. Here is the passbook. 2. Between the years I was 13 and 21, that trust was emptied. 11. Withdrawals. Here are the authorizations. 3. Each one required my signature. I never saw this account. I signed none of them. Here is my real signature from the bank, and here are the 11 that aren't. I slid the pages toward the principal, because the principal ran the scholarship, and the principal needed to see them more than anyone. 4. A large part of that money went into the Theo Marsh Memorial Scholarship. the one I was made to stand up and honor every year of my life. You took my future, Mom, and you spent it building a statue to my brother. And then you told me the funeral was my fault, so I'd never ask where my future went. Nobody at that table remembered how to speak. I will tell you what happened in the silence that followed, because I have replayed it in my mind every day since. The principal picked up the pages and read them the way a man reads something he already knows is going to end his evening. The pastor took off his glasses and put a hand over his eyes. My stepfather, quiet, absent, complicit for 20 years, stood up. He did not go to my mother. He walked the long way around the table and stopped behind me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he left it there. And I understood that his silence had finally cost him more than the truth would. And Nora, my little half-sister who'd grown up on the story that I was the family's disaster, stood up from her chair, walked around the empty place set for a brother she'd never met, and stood on my other side. Two people behind me, one I'd known my whole life, and one I barely knew. Both of them chose, in the same minute, to stand where the truth was. My mother spoke last. Her voice was small now, and strategic. And I heard the strategy under the smallness, the way you hear a false note in a familiar song. You've always been so cold, Delia, she said. You were cold as a child, and you are cold now. Theo was warm. Theo would never. Theo left me a message that week, I said. I pressed the button again. Hey, Dee. It is your favorite brother. Don't tell Mom. But I got you something for your birthday. And it is gonna blow your mind. 2 more weeks. Practice your chords, kid. You are gonna need 'em. My brother's voice, 19 years old, warm, alive, in that room, saying my name like it was a good thing to say. My mother put her face in her hands. It was the first honest thing I'd seen her do in 24 years. And even then, I couldn't be sure. If you have ever heard the voice of someone you lost and realized, too late, how much they actually loved you. Drop a single heart in the comments. Just a heart. So, I know you heard it too. There is no courtroom scene in a town like mine. There are only chairs that quietly start to stay empty. I didn't have to punish my mother. The system did it exactly the way I'd set it in motion. Lawfully. Weeks before. Let me tell you what her world looked like. 3 weeks later, the bank completed its investigation and made a written finding. The signatures on all 11 withdrawals were not mine. The trust had been drained through forgery because my grandmother had funded it as an irrevocable trust. A fund the trustee is legally forbidden to touch for herself. My mother had not just lied to me. She had broken the one kind of promise a bank is built to enforce. The finding went to the restitution process. The $40,000 plus 24 years of the interest it should have earned became a debt with her name on it. I did the math so you don't have to. It came to just over $71,000. That is more than she had. That is a house refinanced. That is the rest of her comfortable retirement, spent paying back a granddaughter she'd told the town had lost her mind. The scholarship was worse for her, because the scholarship was her name in the town's mouth. The school could not keep a memorial fund, built partly on stolen money. The principal, quietly and without a single reporter, moved to restructure it. My brother's name stayed on it. I asked for that, because none of this was Theo's fault. And Theo would have hated every bit of it. but my mother's name came off the letterhead. She was no longer the founder. She was no longer invited to give the speech. After 24 years, the one stage she had built for herself went dark, and she was not on it. Her name was not in the photograph on the society page after that year's dinner. It was the first time in 24 years that it wasn't. She was not punished by a judge. She was punished by absence. And in a town like ours, that is the only punishment that lands. The pastor drove 90 minutes to Portland to see me. 2 weeks after the dinner, he sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea going cold on his knee. And he told me something I hadn't known. My mother had gone to him, privately, back when I was 16, and told him a careful version of Theo's death. One that placed a wandering, difficult younger sister at the edge of the blame. He had carried that version into every gentle conversation he'd had with me since. At 16, he'd counseled me to honor my mother's grief. At 22, to come home and not add to a mother's suffering. At 30, when I stopped calling, he'd told a neighbor I'd hardened my heart. He'd been holding a knife for 24 years and had never once been told it was a knife. He apologized for all of it. He cried a little, quietly, into a folded handkerchief, and he did not ask me to forgive him, which is the only reason I could. I told him. I did. I meant it. He was the second person that spring who'd been handed a weapon in the dark, and set it down the moment the light came on. There would be a few more. She reacted the way she always did. By escalating, she left voicemails, 6, the first week. Then a letter, 4 pages. No apology anywhere in it, only her grief repointed at me. Only new ways to be the victim of her own crime. She showed up once at my building in Portland and stood under the entrance light until June went down and told her, kindly, that she could not come up. I answered each of these with silence, except once. When she left a voicemail that said, "You've killed me, Delia. This will kill me." I texted back one line. You said the same thing about a 12-year-old. She is fine now. That was the last thing I ever said to her. I refused the cheap ending. And I want you to know I refused it on purpose. My mother did not become a good person. There was no tearful reunion. No walk on the beach, where she finally understood. That ending is a lie the internet loves. And I was done with lies. What I got was smaller and truer. I got my name back. Literally. When the bank restored the trust and reissued the account in my name, I went in and signed for it. In blue ink. With my confident left-handed A. And it was the first document in 24 years with my name on it that I had actually put there myself. A signature is the one drawing of yourself you make 10,000 times. Someone had been drawing mine for me. Badly. For a long time. I took the pen back. And I got Nora. My little sister and I have dinner now. Once a month. At the same diner where June once told me you can leave a light on for someone without standing in it your whole life. Nora is learning who her brother actually was. From the one person left who remembers him without a script. That is the one warm thread I got back, and it is enough. There is one more thing. On the Sunday after the dinner, my stepfather did something my mother never had. He gave me the key to Theo's room, the room she'd kept locked and untouched as a shrine for 24 years. And he walked away down the hall, so I could go in alone. The room was exactly as it had been in February of the year. I was 12. Hockey posters, a blue rug, a bed made with a plaid quilt. His guitar was on a stand in the corner, and I sat on the floor, and I did not touch it. because I had promised myself I wouldn't touch anything until I understood what I was standing in. Then I opened the drawer of his desk, and under a layer of ticket stubs and loose picks, there was a receipt, a layaway slip, from a music store 2 towns over, dated 3 weeks before he died. A child-size guitar, a 3/4 size. The kind you buy a beginner with small hands, paid down in installments. 2 payments left. A name, written in the memo line, in my brother's terrible handwriting, for D. Do not tell her. That was the birthday present. That was what was going to blow my mind. My brother had been saving up, in secret, to buy his kid sister her first real guitar, so she could practice her chords on something that was actually hers. He made his last payment the week he died. He never got to give it to me, and my mother found this receipt sometime in 24 years of tending her shrine, and she left it in a drawer, and she let me believe I was a debt he died paying, when the truth was in her own house the whole time. My brother wasn't running an errand for me. He was buying me a future. 2 of them. Tried to. She stole one and hid the other. I bought that guitar last month. The store still existed. I paid the 2 payments that were left in cash, and I brought it home, and it hangs on the wall above my desk, next to the framed layaway slip with his handwriting on it. I don't play well. I know 3 chords. He taught me all 3. I did cry once, and I told you I would tell you when. It was in the car in the music store parking lot, alone, with the guitar in the passenger seat, where the folder used to ride. I cried for about 4 minutes. Then I drove home. That is the only time. I am not ashamed of it, and I am not proud of it. I was 36, and I was finally allowed to. I want to end on the light, because the light is where I started. For 24 years, my mother left the porch light on and told the town it was so her boy could find his way home. But the dead don't come home, and she knew that. The light was never for Theo. It was a stage light, and she stood in it, and it made her the grieving mother, the brave one, the wounded saint, and it kept the whole town looking at her, and never once at the 12-year-old girl standing just outside the glow, holding a poem she didn't write, being blamed for a road she was never on. I don't leave a light on for anyone who can't come home. But every night, when June is on a late shift at the hospice, I leave one on in our front window for someone who can actually walk through the door. That is the difference. That is the whole difference. Some grief is love, and some grief is a room with your name on the lock, and the person holding the key is telling everyone how much they miss you while they keep you inside. The most loving thing you can do for the people you've lost is to refuse to be buried with them. If you have ever kept a light on for someone who is never coming back, or if you finally turned it off, tell me in one word. Light, if it is still on. Door, if you closed it. I read every single one, and I'll be reading tonight. I am Delia Marsh. I was never the sister who cost him his life. I was the sister he was buying a guitar for.